So are brokers up shit's creek right now, or are they actually making a killing in the current market? This is a question that has been asked by many people. And while I know that this channel is primarily targeted towards owner operators, carriers, drivers, basically folks on the trucking side, this question about brokers is one that has to be answered because whether we agree with it or not, many carriers still depend on brokers for their freight. And that means that our business depends on what is going on with those freight brokers. So let's go ahead and chat about what's going on with brokers financially in this market and how it affects carriers. Ready? Let's go. Now, of course, I'm very, very much aware that a lot of folks will think or say that I couldn't care less about how brokers are doing in this market because for the past 4 years, carriers were beat down and it's our time right now. So whatever brokers are going through, it's not my business. Now, I get the sentiment. I truly do. But the reality is, whether we agree with it again or not, is that if brokers are sinking, so is your bank account, sadly, especially if you rely on brokers to get your freight. Now, let me explain. If we have a situation where most brokers are paying out of pocket pretty much on every single load because they're in a situation where the shipper does not want to increase rates, the broker has to move the load without losing the customer. If they're paying out of pocket for the majority of the loads they move, it's only a matter of time before they go out of business. Now, we already learned what happens when a broker unexpectedly goes out of business. We have had examples such as Convoy or R&R Express. There were many, many others. And what usually happens is that the carriers who worked for that broker, they don't get paid for the loads that they moved. Now, the issue with this is predictability, right? And this is something I have been paying attention to over the past few months. Surprisingly, it is pretty hard to predict which broker is actually going out, at least with the generic tools that most of us use. There is a broker that I have been working with quite frequently, DNL Transport. And just recently, my factoring company downgraded them from a C to a D, which means that they are no longer factorable. And this was a shock because they have always paid on time. Now they're back to a C rating, but now I am kind of iffy about booking loads through them because they had that temporary downgrade, and now I'm unsure whether this is someone who is going to pay the factoring company or whether the factoring company is going to come after me to collect the load amount, recourse factoring. I do use recourse factoring to keep the percentages down, the fees down. So the question again is whether brokers are making more now than they did before the market turned to the carrier's favor. And this is a question because of COVID as well. There is a misconception that exists in this industry that brokers were destroyed during COVID because the rates were so high and that carriers were asking for higher rates. Brokers were destroyed. They were not. They were actually making some serious money during that time. Shippers were paying more. The broker margins were still pretty sizable, right? And they had more volume. So brokers were making a killing during COVID. Now, this time around, it's actually a little bit different from COVID, both for the carrier and the broker. Even though we're hearing about historically high rates right now, according to Sean Dehan from Truckstop. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name here, but he said what we're tracking pretty closely is that if you look at the whole market very holistically, we looked at real rates before fuel on the spot market side, and almost all the equipment types remain below what would have been a trend line from 2020. In other words, carriers are actually not making as much as they did during COVID, regardless of the fact that the rates are higher. Now, brokers, according to Dehan, are also not in a good spot. Margins are challenged right now for brokers and have been for the last 6 months or so as rates have moved up quickly and meaningfully. Now, this makes sense, at least to me, it would make sense because something that I have noticed is that shippers are the ones who are having a very, very hard time getting used to the new situation. So shippers are actually holding the rates down, hoping that this is just a temporary thing and that they will be able to move their load at a lower price. And what brokers end up having to do is, again, pay out of pocket for some of the loads they move simply because there is not enough capacity and they have to get that load moved or risk losing their customer. Now, Ken Adamo, who recently actually left DAT and joined Ease Logistics as a chief strategy officer, said that it's a tale of two sides of the business when it comes to brokers. Bigger brokers are in a tougher situation than smaller brokers are, which is kind of interesting. It's something that you wouldn't expect. According to Overdrive, since bigger brokers now lock in contracts and most smaller brokers only ever get access to spot loads from shippers, smaller brokers might be doing well while bigger contract holding brokers get whacked. And this is pretty simple. This is actually one of the reasons I am never going to do contract freight, at least in our company, because contract rates, they usually last a year and you're kind of not quite, but kind of bound by that contract. Again, this is called a paper contract, but because it's only good on paper and there are rejections all the time, but still you're kind of bound by that contract for a while. Now, contract freight can be a great thing if the general market starts going to crap and you're locked in at a higher rate from, let's say, 6 months ago. But it also can work the opposite way. The market might flip, but you're locked in with a rate from 6-8 months ago, which paid significantly lower. And now the general market is getting better. Now, this is usually when rejections happen. But yeah, you're locked into that rate. And this is why I really like working off the spot market, even though I know a lot of you guys don't agree with this and you think it's a bad business practice. It has worked for me for years now, almost a decade, my goodness, almost a decade. It has worked for me, and I just want to keep my finger on the market, on what's happening. And the spot market is the best way to do so. So according to Adamo, most of these contracts were awarded or renewed in the last 6 to 9 months, and margins have totally collapsed because those contracts were before the rates went up the way they did. For example, if a broker negotiated 6 to 9 months ago $2.50 per mile on a load, but the market is now paying $3.20, $3.30 on this load, yeah, that means that the broker has to make up the difference. They underbid that load. It's a question of timing. Now, a big broker with these contracts will usually make up that difference, the difference between the underbid price and the market price right now. Because as Sean DeHaan said, large brokers who hold contracts prioritize keeping customers happy, even if it means temporary losses for themselves. Quoting, brokers who are not looking to grow market share, usually spot market brokers, right, small brokers, are likely pushing 18% plus margins. So they're doing great. But for brokers who are willing to bite the bullet, the bigger brokers who have contracts, the margins are likely much lower, but leading to bigger volume relationships. So they're prioritizing the potential future relationship that results in more volume, and volume kind of, it doesn't protect you, but it cushions you from what's happening in the market. The more volume you have as a broker, even if you're making smaller margins, you're still making more money. This is exactly what happened during COVID, by the way. Now, this is all according to Overdrive and analysts who are looking at data. And one thing I was very curious about is hearing from real people what they're experiencing. And one of the ways I do this is by looking at Reddit, which is basically a chat room for everybody. And I look at the posts of what carriers and brokers are saying. Now, there was one very interesting post where a carrier posted in a freight broker forum saying, honestly, I know that a lot of you are great brokers who do not screw over your carriers at their expense, but damn, I cannot lie, it feels good to see things flip. Carriers are the backbone of this industry, agreed. We provide the most service and carry the most risk. I can't help but smile as you guys take your losses, and it's not going to get any easier for you. Now, the comments to this post, I mean, it's a pretty, it's a statement that this poster made, even though I agree carriers are the backbone and I understand the sentiment. But of course, the comments, the responses were everywhere. 80% of the responses were seriously offended at this post. Some saying how this is a stupid post, we're supposed to work together, it's about relationships, which is interesting considering that those relationships did not matter when the market was on the shipper side. And then there was someone who said, oh, you're talking such a big game, but the reality is that the cycle is going to flip and you're going to be in a very bad position as a carrier because that's how the market works. But then there were also comments saying things like, doing better than ever right now, or my revenue tripled. Please keep increasing rate, carriers. Although when the market flips, I'll push the rates back down as far as I can, as it just seems this is the nature of the industry. So the reason I'm telling you this is because folks who work in this industry, they are saying, brokers are saying that yeah, some of them are doing very, very well. There are also those that are really, really struggling right now. But I think the struggle is not so much about margins. Those that complain about how difficult it is, they are just scared of losing their customers because usually the complaint revolves around the fact that they can't find capacity to cover a load. So it seems like the fear is that if they cannot find capacity, they're going to lose the customer. Now, considering the topic of this video, I know that many will have a question about, hey, what about broker transparency? It has been quite a while since we heard anything about it. Well, the FMCSA was supposed to release an updated rule about broker transparency last month in May of 2026, but of course they didn't. Now, the good news is that Overdrive did reach out to the FMCSA asking for comment or an update. So hopefully there is going to be an update and I am going to keep you guys posted. But I do have a question. Most of you know how I feel about broker transparency. If you do not, I simply don't care about it. I don't feel either way about it because my philosophy was always, as long as I'm making what I need to be making, I don't care what goes on behind closed doors of the broker's business. I know that a lot of you disagree with my sentiment about this, but alas, this is where I am. My question for you guys is, what are your thoughts on broker transparency now with the market the way it is? Do you feel like it's less urgent when the market is on the side of carriers, or do you feel like it's more urgent when the market is on the side of carriers? Again, I'm very, very curious about this, and despite the fact that I personally feel very neutral towards broker transparency, I very much understand people who are very, very much for it and want it to be pushed through. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining and watching. Wishing you an awesome rest of your Thursday. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning.